Westfield Redevelopment Commission. Declaration of a quorum. John, if you would, please take roll.
Linda Noss.
Here.
Bob Beaudry. Jill Doyle.
Here.
Doug Holtz.
Here.
Joe Plankus.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, we have a quorum. First order of business is the approval of the minutes for our meeting on May 15th, 2023, and July 17th, 2023.
Hold on, Bob's here.
Okay, Bob's pulling up. Okay, we'll give Bob a chance to get seated here. Okay, and show that Bob Beaudry did arrive at 5:32. Okay, back to our minutes. Are there any changes, modifications that we want to highlight for the minutes of May 15th? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion for approval of the minutes of May 15th?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Jill Doyle. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Doug Holtz. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. John, if you'll take the roll, please.
Joe Plankus.
Yes?
Doug Holtz.
Yes.
Jill Doyle.
Yes.
Bob Beaudry.
Yes.
Linda Noss.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 5-0. Any questions on the minutes of July 17th, 2023? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion for approval? I'll move for approval of the minutes for July 17th meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Doug Holtz. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. John, if you would, please.
Jill Doyle.
Aye.
Bob Beaudry.
Aye.
Linda Noss.
Aye.
Joe Plankus.
Aye.
Doug Holtz.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 5-0. Next item on the agenda is the docket for claims. Okay, any questions in regards to the docket?
I just have a question when it comes to costs and Lantern Commons and what we were just talking about. Since there's so many charges, even on this statement and claims for Lantern Commons, are those going to be put into the costs in the bond, or how are we gonna?
Yes, that'll go in that'll be all
So
captured,
someone
right,
will
John?
go back and pull all those up,
Boss?
right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay, anything else, Linda?
And then ongoing, the expenses of the commission in carrying out the development agreement and its duties under that will come off of the top of the TIF revenue before we get to the pledged source of revenue.
Good, because you
Okay.
explained that earlier. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Okay, if there are no other comments, I'm open for approval of claims.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Doug Holtz. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second by Jill Doyle for approval of claims. John, please take the roll.
Bob Beaudry.
Aye.
Jill Doyle.
Aye.
Doug Holtz.
Aye.
Joe Plankus.
Aye.
Linda Noss.
I'm really hoping to see that not to exceed agreement this evening, because there's some expenses in here. Based on us getting that, I'll say aye.
Okay.
Okay, motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, and I'll turn it over to John Rogers and Jim Crawford, the Front Street Developer Agreement, Resolution 05-2023.
This is a developer agreement, as Joe mentioned. It is a economic development tax increment revenue bond. And I'll let Jim Crawford take you through the details of the deal. Thank you, Jim.
Basically, this is the same arrangement and structure as the Wheeler Landing project. The bonds in an amount not to exceed $9.9 million to be issued by the city under the Economic Development Statute. Oh, and by the way, the EDC has just concluded its meeting and it approved this development agreement and passes that on to you with recommendation for approval through its resolution. The developer will purchase the bonds and up to $9.9 million of cost for implementing the project, which is described in the development agreement, and a map of which is Exhibit D to the development agreement. And by the way, Linda, thank you for the comment to add the clerk treasurer to the inspection provisions.
You're welcome.
It was a good catch. The project is being paid for by the bonds, and the bonds are being repaid by what we have denominated as the pledged net TIF revenues. We'll have the revenues that come off of this project, and then right off at the top, the expenses of the commission on an ongoing basis in administering the bonds and this project will be paid for first from TIF revenues. And then after those are paid, the remaining TIF revenues are called the net TIF revenues. And 80% of that net is pledged to repayment of the bonds. The other 20% is available to you as the commission to use for whatever legal purposes you desire. And so it's only a pledge of 80% of the TIF after your expenses are covered. The developer will purchase the bonds. The interest rate on the bonds will not to exceed 8%. It is a variable rate which floats according to the SOFR index, which replaced the LIBOR index, which matches what the loan interest provisions are pretty much in the developer's financing with its bank. The bonds, well, I guess I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions.
Okay, any commission members have any questions? Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Okay, the bonds have a maximum term of 25 years from the date the bonds are issued pursuant to the statute. The projections, I think Jim Tree can chime in on this, are for repayment, I think in about 17 years, but it depends on the development of the remaining portions of the parcel and when those come online and what the assessed valuation of those are. Jim Treat and his firm have made projections based on assumptions provided by the developer as to what types of facilities those are going to be and timing of those. And Jim and his firm have taken AV from similar types of facilities around the city and come up with his projections. The bonds are not any direct obligation of property taxes other than the payment of the TIF revenue, and then and we're going to need a resolution from you, which is your resolution number 6, pledging that net TIF revenue to the repayment of the bonds. The bonds are also repaid from RIF and PIF, but that's a pledge of the city in their bond ordinance, and that doesn't come from revenues that you have running through your coffers. I'll be happy to answer any further questions.
Okay, any other questions for Jim Crawford? Okay, seeing none, I'm open for a motion for approval. I'll read the resolution. 05-2023, resolution of the Westfield Redevelopment Commission approving the execution of a development agreement regarding certain public improvements in the Lantern Commons Economic Development Area. Do I have a motion for approval?
I was hoping I could ask John Rogers a question to clarify something.
Sure, go ahead.
Can you explain to me when Jim was talking about the 80%? What is that?
The 80% of the RDC TIF dollars that are collected. So the tax increment,
Right.
the increment revenue is 80% of it is applied to
the debt.
To the debt.
Okay.
The 20% that comes back to us, that is filtered back to us, is for our use from the point that we start collecting it, which would probably be, let's see, so we're paid 24, paid 25, 26.
And
probably more.
what would that 20% be used for?
It could be used for some of these O.W. Crone expenses, the Taft expenses, those types of expenses, right?
So
For,
expenses directly related to that too?
yeah, well, directly related to, or other activities that we might want to do.
Whatever
that.
we can legally use this for.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not
I think Jim could probably do a better job of explaining that.
Yeah,
Go-
it's not restricted to use by, on this project. If you wanted to, use those revenues for allowable uses, under the statute, for items unrelated to this project, that's perfectly acceptable. If you want to pledge a portion of that 20%, to, some other, TIF obligation, that's, allowable also. So it's not, that these dollars are captured within this project forever, never to see the light of day.
John and Jim, isn't this exactly what we did with Wheeler?
Yes,
Okay.
other than I don't think
Yeah,
Wheeler.
I don't think we did the
It wasn't
80-20 split.
80%. It wasn't. It was
No.
the full use of the TIF revenue to repayment of those bonds. So this is a step forward in the city being able to retain 20%.
Didn't we have that with?
Go
Seth?
ahead, Jim Treat.
No, I was just confirming that, yes, Jim, that we did not have an 80-20 split. We did dedicate all of the TIF revenue other than administrative expenses to the Wheeler bonds. Linda, what were you going to ask?
Well, my question was, did we do that with SEP and 80-20?
Yes.
Okay. So is it pretty much just like this one? Other than, I see we're not, according to this one, having to buy more ground, thank goodness. And then my question,
No, we didn't use impact fees on that one, Linda. This has the benefit of, well, the added portion of using impact fees that the project generates to pay down the
yes,
par amount of the bonds. We didn't do that on the SEP one.
okay,
So they'll
You
pay
asked
down
if it was
faster.
the same. No, it's not exactly. But
it's
that
not,
would be the biggest No, that would be the biggest difference. It did have
Yes.
the 80-20 split on the TIF, but it didn't take any impact fees into consideration as far as
Yeah,
being
this-
available
this
to pay
lessens-
down.
okay,
This
so,
lessens the burden of the TIF fee usage.
so
and pays
both,
down the bond
yeah.
transfer fee.
both of you, Jims, and that's why I was asking about phasing dates on the project, because we're talking in here about using impact fees, RIF fees, and then the 80% and taking these expenses, you know. So what is the timing and how does this work together with the date of the bond and the phase dates of construction? Because once you start constructing, we have to wait for value to come in, you know, when it's assessed in January and then it comes the next year. So Jim Treat, have you reviewed
ma'am.
all that?
Oh, yes, Linda, I've been working on it for quite some time.
I thought for your
With different
bills
data
you
with
were.
yes, different versions, well, that's part of the negotiation that's been going on,
Okay,
private negotiations with Front Street and their council that you heard from at the IDC meeting.
yes,
With all sorts of different, because it started with different components. I don't know if you're aware, of what the pieces are, but yes, we've reviewed it all. We've compared it to, as Jim Crawford said, I don't know if it was this meeting or the last one, but as we compared it to other like developments in the area for multifamily, hotel, retail, senior living, office. Those are the pieces. So we have factored in, as John said correctly, 26 should be the first year where you get increment that would
I would
come
think so.
primarily from the multifamily that Eric said earlier that was the one they were ready to get started on first. And the good news about that, Linda, is that in the phasing of it, multifamily provides about 50% of uh, the whole TIF revenue. So when that's about $800,000 in TIF revenue, just to give you rough numbers,
Mm-hmm.
and the total TIF revenue is about 1.5. Again, that's gross before the pledges or the administrative costs, but that's the gross revenues. But it will take till best case till 2030 till that all kicks in. So it's going to start out with, let's say, 500,000 in 26 and then build up to about 1.5 million. Most of it will be done by 2029. There'll be a little bit finished in 2030. And I'm talking TIF receipt dates, not construction dates, which, as
Correct.
you're aware, clearly is about 2 years before then.
Right.
So, yes, it's all based on that. That's how the bond was structured. That's how even on the fact of it's a variable rate structure, which is a little bit different. So
Mm-hmm.
when I ran numbers, Linda, and that was negotiated as part of the deal, I ran everything at the maximum. I
Okay.
used that because that range in the documents is somewhere between 5 and 8%.
Yes.
We don't know where it's going to end up, so I used 8% and said this can be repaid with 80% of the TIF, even if it's the maximum borrowing and it's at 8%. So
Okay.
worst case scenario.
And then when is the road impact and the park impact applied?
So what I did there was during the course of the construction of the road projects, we would be taking impact fees that are paid during that time frame and directly paying down the borrowings because this is a draw bond.
Yes.
So they will be making draws for the project. So based on the schedule that we got from the developer of when these projects, again, the ones that are phased in that we talked about, mainly from the hotel and the multifamily, are coming in, and the timing of when those impact fees are due, we estimated about $1 million should be available during the time frame the that the built roads are being built
Okay.
and the park and all that is being finished over the next, I want to say, 30 months or so. From the beginning, it's a little under 3 years. So that would be applied to the bond before the final sizing is set. So the $9.9 million that you're approving is worst case scenario that we don't get any impact fees because we don't know when they're going to come in and we can't really schedule them as fixed payments, as set payments. So they will reduce the amount of the bond, but we have to approve the gross amount. So that number that you've been asked to approve, that's before any application of any impact fees. So that factors into this. And then in addition, after the project's done, the road projects, then in the future, or if there are additional impact fees that come in that had not been collected till then, it would be used to directly pay down the bond balance. Those have not been factored in any of the numbers that I have. So the 16 years that we estimated at the current TIF projections that it would take to pay off these bonds will be shorter to the extent we get additional impact fees that can be applied after the project's done, after the infrastructure project's done.
Okay. And I'm thinking that since last year we saw this presented as 9 million, and then John presented it a couple months ago in a project as 9.18 million, that you have very closely looked at the 9.9, the increase and what makes that up, and we think we have a good number?
Yes. No, we do. We know we do. So, and the biggest, probably the biggest increase was the interest rate and the cap I, Linda.
Okay.
Cap I,
Yep.
it's a big number
Yes?
on on $9 million at 8%. That's
Yeah.
what we provided for. So it's like $1.4 million is
Okay.
cap I. So, and that was a lot of the increase was that.
Was that? Okay, that makes sense. Appreciate the explanation.
Thank you, Jim, appreciate
just-
that.
I just want to point out one thing about the nature of the bonds. While it's important that Jim has done all this math, et cetera, when Jim Crawford says developer-backed bonds, he means that structurally, the risk of that timing of phasing and when the revenue comes online is entirely on the developer. If those revenues don't come in, they can't go back out to the bonds, and there's no recourse against the city or the commission in that case. So just to point that out, in terms of how it was negotiated and structured, there's built-in protection against that kind of scenario, which would differ from your average municipal bond that's a public financing for a public project. So just to make that clear.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
I guess
Cam.
my only stumbling block on the whole thing, I mean, is the 80-20. I don't know why we'd do the 80-20 as opposed to just 100%.
It's a better deal for the city, basically.
Is it?
Yeah, we keep 20.
Okay.
Do something else.
Hopefully, we've got everyone's questions answered. We are open here for a motion for approval of Resolution 05-2023.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Doug Holtz. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Bob Beaudry. Thank you, Bob. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. John, please take the roll.
Jill Doyle,
Aye.
Doug Holtz,
Aye.
Joe Plankus,
Aye.
Linda Noss,
Aye.
Bob Beaudry.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is Resolution 06-2023. I'll read the resolution. It's a resolution of the Redevelopment Commission of the City of Westfield, Indiana, pledging certain tax increment revenues to the payment of an economic development revenue bond of the City of Westfield, Indiana. Jim has covered some of the items here already with the TIF revenues and the like. Jim, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, just to point out that this
Bless you.
resolution authorizes the pledge of the net TIF revenue, which is 80% of the gross less the expenses of the commission.
Okay, are there any questions from commission members regarding Resolution 06-2023?
On the first, first page, number II. Just wanted to note that having been at that presentation this morning and naming the Joe Edwards Plaza, glad to do that now, that I think it was offered that there would be a plaque put there with Joe's name on it, but this II is that plaza, correct? So everything included there, the pavers or whatever, the benches, the seat or seating, shelter, and additional landscaping, and a plaque would be covered by these TIF revenues. So it's not, it's still the TIF taxes coming in from our businesses that are going to go back and pay for this.
Okay, anything else, Linda? Got it covered? Okay, any other questions, commission members? Okay, with that, well, I'm open for a motion for approval of Resolution 06-2023, Pledge of Net TIF Revenues to EDC Agreement.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Doug Holtz. I will second the motion. John, please take the roll.
Linda Noss,
Aye.
Joe Plankus,
Aye.
Doug Holtz,
Aye.
Jill Doyle,
Aye.
Bob Beaudry.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Next item on the, thank you for Eric and your team. Appreciate that. It's great to see the activity going on. You've already done a lot of stuff out there, so keep up the good work, and we're looking forward to seeing what the product will look like and the ribbon cutting for the road. We're excited too. Thank you. I bet you are. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Grand Park agreements for ratification. Matt Trinian.
Good evening, commission members. Again, Matt Trinian, representing Grand Park. Recently sent out the previous month's contracts for ratification. Apologize for a little bit of delay. We've had a few things going on at the park recently. I'd like to get those out a little bit more than a week ahead of time. Unfortunately, it's been less than a week, but nonetheless, I did not receive any questions, but happy to take any if you guys have any.
Okay, Any other questions or comments from commission members?
I just had a question in that since we moved legal fees for these kinds of contracts, and there were a few that were a little different in here, are you now being billed by your own attorney or the city attorney?
Yes,
They have to
so
look
the
at
plan is
some
to
of
run all
these?
that via Taft, and it'll hit our budget, as we work through that process. So Marla was great working through that process, and we are now have it in a position to pay out of the Grand Park 640 budget.
Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, if there are no further questions from commission members, open for a motion for agreement of the Grant Park agreements for ratification.
Linda Nass, I'll move to accept the Grand Park agreements.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second?
Second by Doug Holtz, motion by Linda Nass for approval of Grant Park agreements. John, please take the roll.
Jill Doyle,
Aye.
Bob Beaudry,
Aye.
Linda Noss,
Aye.
Joe Plankus,
Aye.
Doug Holtz.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Matt, next item's also yours, Grant Park turf replacement phase 2.
Yes, so as we come up on the back end of our year, we're making plans for next season, and more than anything, I wanted to get out ahead of this before we get to a contract standpoint. About a year ago, I approached you guys with the ability to replace the turf on F2 through F5 on this field sports side of the campus with the Moats Group, who was the original installers on the on campus for turf. Went through that process, went really, really well. The plan was always to do 4 last year and then come back and do 3. I say last year, earlier this year, and come back and do the 3 remaining outdoor turf fields at the conclusion of this season and into the early parts of next year, with a conclusion date ahead of our first outdoor tournament in mid to late February. More than anything, I just wanted to get out ahead before we get a contract pulled together, and state that for the F6 through F8 turf replacement, we're looking at a total cost of just under $1.5 million. There is a little bit more cost per square foot in the cost of these 3 fields, as we will have stitched in lines for not only soccer like we did on F2 through F5, but also stitched in lines for football, as those 3 fields have been primarily used for WYSI football programming along with other football programming. But it has been the primary fields for WYSI football throughout the park's existence. So that takes the square foot costs up a little bit, but it's a process we're proud of. The selection of turf will be very similar. We'll match what we did on the other fields, so we'll have a very visually pleasing campus, and it's time. Those fields, we drew out 1 more year, and the wear is really shown, and we're ready to replace. So before I went to the contract phase, I at least wanted to bring it up as an introduction more than anything. If you guys have any questions, I plan the process to be very similar to that of last year, where as long as you guys are okay with that, the thought of this, I'm building it into my budget for 24 to be a cash expense in our capital line. But before I went to contract, I just wanted to ensure that we were able to answer or ask any questions of the provider before we go ahead with that contract.
Matt, kind of a dumb question. Is there any salvage value to this turf? Or if there are areas that are unworn, can that be reused, sold, kept? What do we do with it?
Yeah, so the infill itself will be recycled. So all of the black rubber that you maybe, if you walk on a turf surface that you take home with you, will actually be recycled and reused back onto to the new turf. The physical carpet itself, there are a lot of areas that are beyond use. I mean, there's a reason we're replacing it. Yeah. As the Moats Group goes through and rips, they don't do so very kindly. It's a very construction process of. Now, there are certain areas that we do save for certain projects. That said, I've had discussions with local groups that are interested in trying to reuse that turf. While we want to be good stewards of the material that we have on hand, again, there's a reason we're getting rid of it. It's not something that we would be proud to put out anywhere else. That said, we've had people dumpster diving while we've gone through this process and have taken turf, but it's not something that we'd recommend reusing elsewhere. And the
So I can't carpet my patio, huh?
I wouldn't do that. You know, if you wanted to have a little chipping green in your backyard, maybe something you could do with that. But
Okay, thank you.
absolutely, good question.
So are you ready to dumpster dive? Is that what you're saying?
I'm
Okay,
sorry, Matt.
Any questions for Matt in regards to this particular project?
Joe, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just, could you tell me, I kind of missed it for the record, was it F6 through F8?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
F6 through F8, correct.
Okay. I'd like to just add a comment here. Of course, Matt will be bringing this forward later, but I, along with Mr. Moore back there, we volunteered at the Colts camp this year, and as usual, very smoothly run. We had some days where we had total sellouts and somewhere between 10 and 13,000 people, big crowds, just really an awesome event to not only to work for, so to speak, but also to see all the residents of Westfield and coming from all over the Midwest, quite frankly. Quick story I told Matt, coming back from vacation from California and ran into a family of four whose two daughters were going to play softball in Indianapolis. So we were standing in line in Southwest getting our boarding passes, and asked the gentleman, I said, well, where are you going to play your games? He said, oh, we're going to Grand Park. I said, have you ever been there? He says, no. He says, you will have an awesome time. And somebody else chimed up that was in line that was familiar with it and said, you will have a heck of a good time. It's great facilities. And these folks were from LA. So they were coming in with their family all the way from LA to play softball in Grand Park. Really, really cool to talk to those folks.
Yeah, that was the Alliance softball tournament, and bullpen tournament's done a great job of attracting that event to and alongside with Hamilton County Tourism as well. But brought that event to Westfield, and some we're certainly proud of. But thank you for your kind words on training camp. It's a lot of hard work by a lot of individuals, and it's 13 practices visual to the public, but it's a month and a half of grueling
work. A lot of
for
work
the team,
behind the
so,
scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I will be coming at some point as we work to finalize all the numbers, all the data. I'll work to pull together a presentation for everyone when due time is up.
Just to add to that, I spoke with Blake the other day, and we have that one tournament you're referencing, I think, Matt, that has the Midwest connection. They play a tournament on the West Coast, they play one on the East Coast. They have now negotiated, and all three tournaments will be here. It'll tie up Grand Park for 2 full weeks on the baseball side. So that's some really good news. We continue to grow the business, which is very encouraging going forward. Absolutely. So again, thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. We'll look forward to seeing the formal contract.
Just to be clear, no other comments on the contract. We're good to move forward with? Awesome. I'll bring that to you soon. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. John Rogers, RDC Q2 report.
I sent this out, and last Thursday, everybody has had some time to look at it. Linda had some questions. I did have a chance, and frankly, just a lot going on right now, but I did have a chance to at least tick and tie out the actuals to the 30th.
Okay,
And on the actual column, everything ties out. So I'm
on what actual column? What do you mean?
in
The row that says actual?
yeah, the column that says actual.
Well, the beginning balance does, the revenues do, the expenses do, but the number at the bottom does not. The cash balance.
Okay, thank you. I will,
That's-
again, that's the only thing, I just look at the column. So,
Okay, well,
so
yeah, I'm
you want me
clarifying.
to, yeah, thank you. The cash balance is what you're questioning.
Yes.
and this
at
is
the
a
bottom of
report-
the actual column,
Yeah,
yes.
this is a report that I run directly out of the system, so it could be a reporting issue, since everything else ticks and ties. I will look at that. So it basically is total for cash. That line that says total for cash is what you're saying is
Yes, because on
incorrect.
6 of these, they were wrong.
All right.
And considerably wrong.
Okay, I will look at that. Again, it could be a report issue. Thank you.
Okay, and then on this report, when you're listing TSFs, Can you explain those TSFs? I think it means transfers. If you just want to speak to that generally.
Yeah, please.
Okay, I'm going to explain transfers for you. So on this report, they really shouldn't go in there. When we do transfers, we also have to do a due to, due from report that is really an internal report to the clerk treasurer's office. So you wouldn't add it in twice. Where you see under budget, like 301, 015, 131. That indicates we're sending money from 301 to the Grand Park. We're attributing it to Grand Park. So a transfer for purposes of accounting, you wouldn't put on a sheet like this. Just, I think for the future, if that kind of helps. It's an accrual on cash balances, and so you wouldn't list it separately because it's for internal tracking, if that helps.
So in this case, it's a payment on debt service that is, and the debt service is a different debt number, not necessarily an RDC debt number.
Right.
And so for the purposes of this group, and we'll work with Marla and her team to try to tighten this up a little bit, but for the purposes of this group, we've always shown that line so that you could see the payment taking place instead of where it takes place in the other fund number. Is everybody?
Yeah, you know, I think it's different also this year, John, since we are making that payment to the city council in 2 payments, and it's coming out of
Yeah,
a number of different
and
TIF funds.
exactly.
It can be a little bit confusing with the transfer. Am I addressing it correctly, Marla?
Kind of, you would never, we report actual activity. I think that's what you're saying, like
Right.
council repayment and debt services. So you don't want to then also include a transfer line because it cancels itself out.
You don't want to
Money
double
in and
up.
money out, right, right. So that's what would make these totals down under net income and loss kind of unusual looking. They're not, you can't add it up all that way.
And then I wanted to ask a question, because as Joe said, we did make these payments and we have another one scheduled to the council. But have we actually initiated some other investments? Because at the beginning of the year, we had well over 16 million. We were going to pay 6 million to the council. So what are we doing with investments? Do you have a current report on that?
I don't have a report prepared for you because it did happen in August, but I
Okay.
can tell you that I pulled an email between Jeremy and I, and Joe, I think,
Yeah.
was in on
Yeah,
that.
you did copy me on it.
So we did invest $11 million on behalf of the RDC. I brought the email with me just in case it came up.
Okay.
But it's divided out. We did, the thought process here was because we have to account for your interest that you're gonna earn by each individual TIF. So we had to do in units because it's one giant investment of $11 million, not separate $100,000 units from each TIF. So we have to be able to break those back down. So that 11 million will be divisible in 110 units. And then whatever interest is then attributable to each TIF, when we pull it out, it'll go back into your cash balances. I'm happy to do a full report if you'd like, and I can bring it to the next meeting where hopefully we'll have even accrued a little bit of interest because thus far we have not.
I think if you would, Marla, and you develop that report showing what's invested and maybe where it's going as far as what financial institution, but I think you just send an email out to the Redevelopment Commission, let us take a look at that and see what those numbers tell us. And then if we have questions, then we can always, via email, respond back to you and ask appropriate questions on what we have come across.
Sure, just bear in mind that your next quarterly report will look very, very different because those funds would not show up in our regular appropriation summaries that John's doing.
I think if you do it on a quarterly basis, you know, planning out ahead as to where the funds are going and for what period of time, I think a quarterly basis would be sufficient. Monthly, you get too much noise. It's too
Okay.
hard to follow.
Not a problem.
I think this is something different and new, us having investments, and I think it's good that we're doing this, so.
We're very
We will
excited
see
about
different
it.
things on our reports, and that's great.
Really excited to earn you some money. I can tell you this morning's yield, this money just went in on Friday. Weekly yield is 5.23 right now. So on $11 million, we're pretty excited to get you guys
That's a
some
pretty
more
good
money.
return.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Marla.
Great, thank you.
Okay, John, anything else you want to add, or commission members, any questions for John?
No, I didn't have any additional information at this time.
Okay. Okay, we have a document here from Mr. Cam about the not to exceed that I think Linda had brought up some time ago. Obviously, it's the first time we're seeing this document. Any questions from, give you a couple minutes here just to review it.
Again, the purpose being separate and apart from the general engagement for
Right.
working with the RDC. This just covers
The
work
RFP.
with the committee toward a recommendation to the commission and/or as needed the city council about following the evaluation of proposals.
And the date on this is January 9th, so it takes us back to when we started having expenditures. Okay.
So the agreement does not provide for a term of service, so if this process goes on for 3 years, it's still not to exceed $100,000, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's scope-based.
So this is not an annual
Right.
contract?
That's why I was pointing out the January 9th, because,
Yeah, it's a retro, it goes back.
Yeah, if you look
to the
under
beginning of the
fees,
process.
Yeah, everything to date
Yeah.
and for however long this process would play out, that would be the cap.
Okay.
okay. Does it say how often you're going to submit statements? Normally monthly. Okay, we'd like to see
It'll
that.
fluctuate based on the work of the committee, which has been.
Ongoing, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, from our standpoint here as a commission, there's nothing that we need to act on at this point, because I think we approved this.
It's part of the budget, I believe, as I understand it, and what's been approved and appropriated. This documents what that's for. It would probably make sense for you all to approve this, to have a record in the minutes that it's been adopted and that it's retroactive
Right.
to everything to date.
Just to cover our bases, sure. Okay, with that being said, if there's no further questions, I'll look for a motion for approving the agreement with Taft not to exceed $100,000 for the Grand Park RFP agreement.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Oh, sure.
I would have looked it up, but since we just got it. Did we or did we not? I thought we had some RFP fees in 2022. Are we saying we're not sending any of that anyplace else? I mean, we had closed 2022, so obviously we couldn't.
Yeah, right. we
But
can't.
are they inclusive of this?
I wouldn't think so, since it's dated January 9th. That's why I was.
Yeah, I'd have to refresh my recollection about what that was. I think this was a 2023 forward amount and would not reach back into 2022, but would certainly cover anything from this year ongoing.
That's a discussion I remember, Cam, that we said, 22's gone, let's move forward from January on. But memories can get dull after 9-10 months.
I think that's what I recall too. I don't think there was an intent for this to reach back into a prior year. That'd be
okay.
confusing.
And then, because it's directed to Jeremy, who's supposed to sign it? And do you want, you guys definitely, I mean, I'm assuming you need to vote on it. I'm happy to send it to him, just wanting to know officially who you'd like to have sign it.
It'd be up to the commission, as it would be fine for Jeremy to sign it, given his appointment as executive director of the commission or the president of the commission. I think either one would work.
Okay,
Yeah.
great on my end, thank you.
Okay. Okay, with that being said, do I have a motion for approval of the agreement?
So moved.
Okay, I'll second that motion. John, take the roll, please.
Jill Doyle,
Aye.
Bob Beaudry,
Aye.
Lyndon Oss,
Aye.
Joe Plankus,
Aye.
Doug Holtz.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 5-0. John, will you take care of getting appropriate signatures and so on? Cam needs to sign it, and then, are we gonna have Jeremy sign it?
No, I think Cam's okay with you signing it, and.
I'm
and
fine, yeah.
Yeah, I'm with Marla. I think you sign it, Cam
Okay.
signs, and we're done. And they
Okay.
record it.
Well, I'll sign and give it to Cam for his signature then. Okay.
No, I got one more question.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Lynn.
I have one more question while Marla's here, and I mentioned it to Matt, but the monies that we had approved in claims out of our legal and then decided that was 640 charges, has that been transferred? What was that amount? Is there any business we have to do about that here?
The transfer to 640 was $9,108, I believe, as directed by Jeremy to us. So we have done that, and it should show up on a future report.
Okay, so we'll see it added back into that account. Okay.
Okay, if there are, no, is there any additional business, John, that we have before the commission tonight?
Not this evening.
Okay, then I'll move that we adjourn. Do I have a second? Second, Bob Beaudry. All in favor, voice vote, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0 passes. Meeting is adjourned at 6:17.